Oh, we're live. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today, along with the UCU and the NUS, after the A-level fiasco, which we've seen over the past few days. We saw nearly 40% of grades marked down, which would have robbed thousands of young people of the future they deserve, and hundreds of thousands have joined the campaign against the government's disgraceful behaviour. And even in spite of the U-turn that we've seen today on A-levels and thankfully GCSE results, the government have continued to cause chaos in our education system. And that's part of the reason why we're here today, to look at the campaign moving forward, to see what we're going to do next with the campaign to fund our future. And I'd also ask everybody not to forget that even with this victory that we have had, many BTEC and MVQ students still haven't had their grades. And some of those who did get them were significantly downgraded. And I think it shows a lot with what the government did before with the off-qual algorithm, and that they still haven't sought a solution for overwhelmingly working class group of students. It's been an absolute disgrace. And yes, we have had victory, but there is so much more to do. You're going to hear from a fantastic range of speakers today, and you're going to get the opportunity to put some questions to them as well and find out more about how you're going to get involved. Just to let you all know that we unfortunately don't have a British Sign Language interpreter. So if you could go to the UCU YouTube page, where it's being streamed live, and on YouTube you'll be able to see closed captions. This is also being streamed live across Facebook and Twitter. So I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker for today, who is the UCU General Secretary, Jo Grady. Jo.
Thanks, Belle, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us at short notice, but we have so much that we want to talk to you about. For anybody who joined in last week, you know that we did a live event on Thursday. Larissa was with us, Roger was with us from Unison, and we really dissected the utter shambles that was the fallout of the A-level results and BTEC that we saw last week. We pledged during that meeting that it was not going to end there. That staff were not going to leave students high and dry and unsupported, and that actually what we need long term is a cross-campus union, including the student union, response to not just this issue, but the various injustices in education. And that's exactly what we're doing this evening. And it's actually what me and Larissa and a number of other UCU, NUS and activists up and down the country were doing all over the weekend. So we wanted to update you with what we've been doing. What we would have been doing if the government had not have turned back around and actually to somewhat retreated from their position, but more about that in a minute. But also what we intend to do going forward. Because obviously yesterday's announcement confirming that centre assessed grades would stand both for A-levels and GCSEs was welcome. It was belated. The idea that Gavin Williamson did this because they listened and realised that there was unfairness and inequality in the algorithm that they knew would have these things in, I'm not convinced by. I think it was the pressure of students alongside the wholesale just outrage from different communities. So this is welcome, but it's belated. And actually the conversations that we've been having this weekend is, it really reveals something about this government and the extent to which they think that they can treat certain sections of our student population, but also our staff with contempt. So over the weekend, we had to prepare for the government not making U-turn on this. And we reached out to activists and friends in our sectors and across other sectors as well. And we were ready to launch a legal challenge for a judicial review if we needed to. We were happy to see the government yesterday do a U-turn. However, we don't feel that the impact on students, that the impact on staff, that the position of BTEC students in particular, or actually the real effect that this would have had and will still have on students from different socioeconomic groups, how that cuts across inequalities, has really been addressed. Or indeed, actually, how any of this is going to prioritise the safety of staff and students for the forthcoming academic year. So we today, rather than launching the crowdfunder for a legal challenge for judicial review, which was what we were going to update you about, have done something else instead. So Larissa and I today have jointly written to Gavin Williamson, and we are asking him to give us some firm answers about the sorts of issues that we're going to discuss this evening, but that also, in our opinion, have not been resolved. Because there have been many students, and we're going to hear from one, who are not in a position that they would have been if they'd have got the result they deserved and were warranted to get on Thursday. Those students have not been able to take up the position at a university that they want. BTEC students are still in limbo. And we know that the algorithm that Belle just referred to did disproportionately impact on Black and other minority ethnic students, students with a disability, students from deprived areas, and the government owes those students answers. We also know, and UCU members have been getting in contact with me about the impact that this is going to have on staff. I don't need to tell any members of university staff who are watching this about the significant burden that has been placed on you, not just during lockdown and having to help students through that period, but particularly during these last few weeks, preparing for clearing, preparing for admissions, but also the added and unnecessary anxiety and stress that we have seen in dealing with the huge challenges to prepare for an effective but delivery of safe education in autumn. And the utter shambles that we saw last week obviously has made this even more difficult for you and your individual workloads, but it's also creating chaos across the sector for what we're going to do now for universities that don't meet their student numbers, universities that are able to overrecruit to the detriment of other universities. And the government have not answered any questions about this. They've not said what they're going to do to help universities who have over-recruited accommodate those students, or indeed how it's going to be done safely. And they haven't made any pledges to universities who will suffer as a result of this, under-recruit students, and where we're likely to see a funding hole open up. So the letter that Larissa and I have written covers a number of issues, but it really covers getting some firm guarantees from our Department for Education, from the Secretary of State, about what he's going to do to ensure that no job is lost, that no student suffers, and that any loss of funding across the sector because of this shambles is underwritten by those responsible for causing the chaos. So I'm not going to say anything else. What I'd like to do is hand back to Belle so that other people can say something. But please do make some comments, share this link, ask a question if you want to. Once we've all finished contributing, there'll be plenty of time. Thanks, Belle.
Thanks so much, Jo. And you know, a lot of the staff, lecturers, teachers have been fantastic in terms of dealing with them, put under so much strain, as you've said. And the phrase I like to use at the moment: listen to teachers and not Tories. That's great for them. So next we're going to go to the National Union of Students President, Larissa Kennedy, who's been working alongside Jo on this campaign. Larissa.
Thanks so much, Belle, for the intro. I'm really, really glad to speak alongside you this afternoon. And as Jo says, we've been working avidly together across the weekend because we're doing that in the knowledge that the threat we face as students and as workers is one and the same. That threat is a government that sees our futures, our livelihoods, and our education as disposable, that sees classism, racism, ableism, and all the forms of oppression that we face as necessary and inevitable, perhaps even expedient. So whilst this U-turn was desperately needed, it doesn't change what it revealed. What that system revealed is that education is and has long been a postcode lottery, and that whilst folks pretend that we live in this meritocracy, the reality is that year on year, the government accepts a system where your background, being working class, being black or brown, being disabled, has a direct correlation on the outcomes that you're due to achieve. Because this moderation system, I don't believe that moderation system was broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to, giving the most affluent students their first class route to their first choice university, and leaving the rest of us to scramble in the dust to beg for crumbs when the folks that this system was designed to serve ate the whole cake. And even after we've mounted this public pressure and students have told their stories and they've lobbied the government and we've taken to the streets to demand that U-turn that students deserve, the government's inaction meant it was too little, too late for so many students. I'm hearing from students who are still being denied the chance to study at their university because courses are full despite now having the grades. From A-level students who were private candidates with no centre assessed grades who still don't have any grades to speak of. From BTEC students who were seemingly just forgotten about in yesterday's announcement, who are still in the dark about when they're getting grades. And of course, all of these problems are just symptoms with one rotting problem at their root. This government is and has historically been complicit in educational injustice. Injustice that hits us as students and workers alike, because it's the same system that has left Black and brown students with no grades that leaves Black and brown workers disproportionately casualised. And that injustice is not only immoral, we're betting it may even be unlawful. And as Joe said, we're not afraid to put forward that legal challenge if that's what it takes to get justice. But in the meantime, we gather ourselves together, shoulder to shoulder, student to staff, union to union, ready to fight back against this government. Because we're going to safeguard students' grades, we're going to safeguard workers' jobs, and we're going to safeguard our sector as a whole. And to do this at NUS, we are calling for a national picket of the Department for Education. We'll be doing this sort of socially distanced, of course, outside each of their HQs and digitally calling them out too. And that's happening at 1 p.m. this Thursday. So we'll be there in London, in Coventry, in Sheffield, in Darlington, in Manchester, in Bristol. We'll be there anywhere else you folks want to picket. We'll be there across social media, because we are not accepting piecemeal U-turns and reforms. We are seeking to foster new communities, ideas and movements that can nurture the kernel of a new age, one that brings true justice for education. So again, so much thanks to UCU for working alongside us on this. The solidarity is real. And I'm so excited to move towards that true justice for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. UCU and NUS, students and staff standing together to demand justice in education. It's a great thing. And, you know, Joe and Larissa both mentioned the race and class element of what's happened. And when we look across the country, we see that 40% of students were marked down. But when it came to people in BAME communities and in working class communities, this was as much as 60%, which shows just how terrible this situation is. And, you know, I spoke to Ofqual on Thursday, and they assured me that, you know, they were going to come out with their appeals process. But they also showed me that they were working with UCAS and looking at the situation. So I was shocked to see that people were going through clearing. And because the marketisation of education over the years, people just tried to fill up their courses. So as you just heard, people are going to find themselves in a situation where their course is now oversubscribed, or they missed out on their first choice university just because of the mess up before, which we had been warning the government about for months. It's been a complete shambles. Now, next, you're going to hear directly from people who have been impacted by this chaotic mess. The first person we're going to hear speak is Delilah Lees, who's an A-level student. Delilah.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honour to speak alongside you guys. So yeah, what happened for me was that I woke up on results day and wasn't really expecting anything big. You know, I was just thinking I did just, you know, quite an average day, and I opened it. And it was absolutely devastating. I looked at these and I thought, my God, I'm not going to get into anywhere. And I was right. I've got no university offers. I got rejected from all of them. And it's just been a scramble these past few days to try and see if I can get into university. I've been emailing and calling universities. Sometimes I've got through, haven't really got any communication. And I've just been really uncertain about my future. A lot of people have suggested maybe deferring a year, but I can't afford to travel for a year, and there's no job market due to coronavirus, so it's not really an option for me, unfortunately. So at school, I've been doing computer science, physics and maths at A-level. I was hoping to do robotics engineering at the University of Bath with an industrial placement. But at the moment, I have no idea if that's actually going to happen. Yeah, I've just been feeling really stressed and uncertain. I haven't really been able to sleep because I just don't know what's happening with my future. And yeah, I'm just hoping that things will turn out okay. The U-turn was I was really happy to see it, because I know that for thousands of students, this could mean, they get into the university they want to go to. But I'm also certain there's many students, BTEC students, people in my position where, courses may be full or they haven't got any communication, where it's really difficult. And the government just are showing that they don't really care about thousands of students, especially minority ethnic students and students who live in postcodes. It is a postcode lottery, I definitely agree. And it's just completely unfair. And it's happened for years and years. And it's just so frustrating to see it happen again, especially during such a hard time, during a pandemic.
Thank you, Delilah. And, I really do hope you do get that university place this year. That we have a massive issue with women in STEM. So it's very, very important that somebody like yourself, goes on to be able to study your robotics degree. Now, next, I'm going to just hand over to Jo Grady, because she's going to say something before I move on to the next speaker.
Sorry, I just wanted to come in on what was just said about, the places. And I know Lauren's going to say something about this from her perspective working in further education. But for staff in higher education to hear the narrative and the experience that you've just had, Delilah, is so heartbreaking, because I think, lots of people were saying from Thursday onwards, even if the government U-turns, there's a huge problem here in terms of who is going to get onto these courses. And you're completely right that, there aren't any other opportunities for you to take up right now because of the situation that we're in. And one of the really awful things, and Larissa and I have spoken about this privately during the media interviews that we've been involved in over the past few days, is, and I think the government and the right wing in this country in particular have been really pushing this idea that, oh, well, if we'd have gone with this from the beginning, there'd be grade inflation. It's like, well, this is a pandemic year, actually. So the idea that we should give students results for exams that they never sit that are a downgrade is preferable to some grade inflation. But actually, what we've actually seen is disproportionate grade inflation for already very privileged students. And I just kind of wanted to step in before we went any further and just say it's been so sickening to have to make that case, because it's so self-evident that this isn't about, bananas grade inflation. This is about ensuring that people don't get disadvantaged, but also that this is a pandemic year and staff now are in a position where, as Larissa said, certain positions have already been hoovered up by the students who were benefited from this algorithm, to the detriment of students that it's now been admitted it was unfair for from the very beginning. And there's a real evidence, not just from months back when UCU was submitting to the consultation for Ofqual, but a team of statisticians, a team of expert statisticians offered forward their services, but were unable to assist Ofqual because they wouldn't sign a 5-year non-disclosure agreement about this algorithm. And that tells you everything you need to know. And that's why this is not done and dusted, not just because students like you deserve justice, not just because members of UCU, whether they're in further or higher education, are worried about the integrity of education and how we're going to deal with student numbers and how the government is going to underwrite this sector to ensure that there's enough staff to care for students, but because this issue hasn't gone, because as Larissa says, there is an attempt to hardwire disadvantage and bias that we know exists into these results. And I'm sorry, I just had to say that, but I will zip up now and hand back to you, Belle.
Thanks, Jo. You're absolutely right. And a couple of days before the results were released, I wrote to all of the sixth forms and colleges in my constituency, knowing that we were hurtling towards this, and offered to write to every university that was trying to push out one of my students. And the next day, on the day of the results, I got some heartbreaking emails, just and from parents in particular, who said that they're one woman was telling me about her daughter who wouldn't leave her room, was in tears, wouldn't eat, was just so heartbroken by what had happened because she had worked so hard the pandemic has been no one's fault, and to make people pay for it in this way is been absolutely disgraceful. So next we're going to hear from Laura Muna, who's a curriculum team leader for A-Levels in Blackburn. Lauren.
That's okay. It causes all sorts of confusion, my name. As Belle said, I'm a curriculum team leader at Blackburn College for the A-level provision, but I'm also the head of politics. Blackburn is, I think, now the 12th most deprived town in England. We have massive levels of poverty. The type of students that come to us are not your Cambridge, Oxbridge students normally, but they come to us with fairly good GCSEs, and we usually get them really strong A-level results, and they go on to do great things. When the pandemic hit us this year, I had a class of 12 students that were studying politics. I was expecting really strong results for them. They were really enthusiastic, really positive. The beauty of politics as a subject is it's something that seems to be seasonal almost with what's going on in politics nationally, and it really inspires young people to get involved. So I had a really, really passionate cohort of students. I'd said to them, don't worry about it. I won't see any of you disadvantaged. We'd done plenty of mock exams, plenty of practice assignments. I felt confident that the grades that I was giving them were going to reflect their ability to work. We have failed Ofsted twice. We've got 2 grade 3s, so we're currently being monitored by Ofsted. So our management team were very, very strict in making sure that we had to stand up to scrutiny. We couldn't just be giving them any grades that we felt it had to stand up to actually the evidence and be an evidence-based process. Out of my 12 students on Thursday morning, I woke up. My first notice that something had gone wrong was I got a message at 8:10 from a student saying, how could you predict me a U? Because they knew that it was based on teachers' predictions. And that was basically how my day went from that moment onwards. Out of my 12 students, 10 of them had been downgraded. The only 2 that hadn't been downgraded were the top 2 students, one that got an A, one that got a B. One of my students was downgraded by 1 grade, 7 were downgraded by 2 grades, and 2 of them, heartbreakingly, were downgraded by 3 grades. I predicted them C's. They'd never had lower than, I think one of them had got 2 D's over the year, and they both were awarded U's. Now, we know that the algorithm that was applied, and we know the reasons that the justification they gave for it. The problem I found is that my students were being punished for being students at Blackburn College. So because the results last year, in politics last year, I had 2 students that failed. One because he didn't turn up for the exam, and one who should never have been doing the exam in the first place. They were being punished for my past students' experience. So I had students that didn't do as well last year, and then my good, strong students this year were being punished for that. That was the first thing they were punished for. The second thing they were punished for was because of their schools. So they were looking at their GCSE results and saying, there's no way with those GCSE results you could possibly achieve those grades. So therefore, they're being inflated by your teachers. So we're not having that. There was no acknowledgement of how hard they'd work or the progress they'd made in those 2 years. No acknowledgement at all. The third thing I firmly believe my students were punished for is that during the 2 years I've had them, 4 of them were picked up and assessed for specific learning difficulties that hadn't been picked up at GCSE. Because we have those smaller class numbers, because we have that great support network in FE colleges, and that great pastoral team, we were able to pick up that these students weren't coping as well as they should be. Out of those 4 students, the 4 of them were found to have specific learning needs and were given support in college. So they had weekly meetings with a support tutor. They would have had extra time in their exam. They would have had things like laptops or a scribe in their exam. None of this was taken into account in that grade algorithm. So I have my students that have been punished 3 times now already. Before they were even able to show their face or get their results, they've already been penalised for being Blackburn students. It's completely unfair. It's totally unfair. And it's the fact that I don't understand how they can go from a C and say, okay, this teacher may have overestimated it. But overestimated by 3 grades, I don't really think so. Now, we have had this amazing U-turn, and, you know, it's great that my students are now contacting me and saying, I've managed to get through clearing, I've managed to get into a degree. It might not be the degree they wanted to, but they've managed to get into a degree. But as we've said, and as we've already heard with Larissa and Delilah, we're having massive problems with these students that haven't actually got the courses that they wanted. And these are students that are being told, well, defer for a year. But the other issue we face is the impact it's had on teachers, because teachers have been heavily criticised anyway during the pandemic. You know, they're just sat at home, they're not doing anything, they're, you know, twiddling their thumbs and getting paid for it. Why should they get an extra holiday? And all the rest of it that you've already heard. But also now teachers are being criticised. All I've heard in social media over the weekend is that teachers would overestimate grades anyway. Teachers would inflate the grades. Teachers can't be trusted. And it's quite certain working in FE, we already feel that we are under-respected. We're not really appreciated by the government. We have, certainly in my institution, we haven't had a pay rise in over 10 years. We've had our funding heavily cut. And we, at Blackburn College, we've just gone through our 5th round of redundancies in 6 years. So we're already an area really that's on our knees and are struggling. And now we've had this huge impact where our professional judgment has been called into question as well. And it's still ongoing. Obviously, the impacts on the students is the first priority, but we can't forget that it's already hard enough to recruit staff into FE. I don't believe this is going to help us at all to get past this.
Thank you very much, Lauren. I was absolutely horrified when I saw over the pandemic the kind of rhetoric that was being put out about teachers, because teachers are working hard every single day, just as they would do if they were in the classroom. And I think some people like to forget that some teachers were actually going into the classroom, teaching the children of key workers, and you know, providing digital lessons every single day. Now we're going to give everybody the opportunity to put some questions to our speakers. Please do post them in the chat. But before we do, I was going to ask Joe and Larissa to come back a little bit about what things they're planning next in terms of the campaign. I think it's really great that the UCU and NUS are working together. So if you could tell us a little bit about plans for, let's start with the near future, so the next couple of weeks. I'll start with Joe first.
Thanks. So I mean, for us, the campaign that we've has been ongoing in UCU, which NUS have been supporting, is Fund the Future. We knew from the very beginning of lockdown that this sector needed government support. And I think in some ways, the way in which Larissa really talked about the problems that are ingrained in education earlier, staff know them, because actually, and I think this is what's been really clear this past few years, is staff's working conditions, our students' learning conditions, and a lot of the absolutely disreputable behaviour in universities that university staff in particular have been taking strike action over the last year has been to do with the working conditions that we have. And COVID, in many ways, you know, whether it's our social care, whether it's the NHS, has really laid bare and exposed problems that we knew were there. And I think the sort of things that Lauren was just saying about FE, you know, the degradation of pay, the smearing of the profession, those things have been seen in higher education as well. One of the reasons that we knew we were facing a real problem with jobs, with funding over COVID, was the extent to which we weren't sure student numbers would hold up. Obviously, we couldn't have known back in March and April just what this would mean. We couldn't have known whether or not we'd be back on campus. We still don't really know that. Different universities are following different patterns of health and safety, not necessarily negotiating with the union over what that should look like. But as you say, Belle, and as Lauren was saying, people who work in education, whether they're teachers or not, have been moving heaven and earth to keep the wheels on the track during lockdown and to keep students with an education, with pastoral care, with counselling, with mental wellbeing sessions. All the time, particularly in HE, this has been happening with redundancies looming large, with institutions looking to cut jobs, despite the fact that they haven't had those fall in student numbers yet. So one of the things that we need desperately, and we will be ratcheting this up now, and it's really good that the NUS are fully with us and understand what this means, is if the government is not going to move in and say, our chaos, this unfair system that we have imposed, but now we're trying to clean up by shifting the blame and shifting the responsibility onto university staff now, you know, so they haven't said, we're reversing all of these decisions on A-levels, and these are the things that we're putting forward to help universities deal with it. They've just said, it's on you now. You decide how you're going to deal with the gross unfairness that we've delivered to students like Delilah and the many thousands of them, and, you know, the kind of students that Lauren was just talking about from her classroom. So universities now, with staff that are absolutely knackered because they've been working all summer, staff where morale is rock bottom, where goodwill basically doesn't exist anymore, and who are themselves on burnout from intensified workloads and are expected to cover the work from staff that universities have let go on fixed term contracts. That is what students are looking at if something is not done in this sector. And staff deserve better. They deserve so much better. And students deserve better than this. The student experience, which is so important, you know, to government, that's what they say. It's what the Office for Students say, but they're not willing to do anything, whether it's to help out our teachers in FE or to help out our staff in HE, to actually be in a position to deliver that with dignity and with respect and being able to actually look after the student as a whole. So when Larissa is saying that the NUS want to still take this forward, that they're going to be holding their own, not UCU, but their own pickets at the weekend, that is great to hear, because the one thing that has happened in higher education over the last 2 years is universities have been really desperate to weaponize students against staff. They've really wanted students to conceive of themselves as the customer that the absolutely abhorrent fees regime in this country has tried to encourage them to do so. But it's the fees regime in this country and the funding model of university that has led to this absolute crisis that we're now in, that has led to institutions, some of which now trying to stockpile students through over-recruitment, to the detriment of post-92 universities that really service their local communities, that have great widening participation. And we saw at the weekend certain right-wing political commentators calling those institutions third rate. Because if you go to Eton maybe and you go to Oxbridge, those institutions don't matter to you. The people who go to those institutions might not matter to you. The type of education that transforms those people's lives. And it's the same kind of education that Lauren was just talking about in FE. That's fundamentally important to the staff that want to work in education. And clearly it's fundamentally important to people like Larissa and to the NUS, because what we're launching and pushing forward with this joint initiative now between NUS and the UCU is fundamentally justice for education. And that goes all the way from students through to staff, through to the environment and the dignity that we have in our institutions. But I know Larissa's got kind of more plans kind of in the immediate future for what that might entail. So I won't take up more time by talking, but hand over.
Thanks, Jo. Larissa, can you let us know what NUS have planned over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so I guess all day, over the past few days, we've been in touch with members who are really feeling that we want to take the energy, the power, the collectivism that we've seen through the A-level protests and continue to drive that forward. And so we are calling that national kind of day of pickets on Thursday at 1 p.m. So please, like, if you want to check that out on NUS's social media, on our website, then please do get involved. But yeah, so we are doing that on Thursday. But of course, that's the immediate term, and there's more to be done for sure. And I see the role of NUS, and this of course starts with the pickets, but I see the wider role of NUS as ensuring that every single student who has felt anger, who has felt let down, who's felt frustration in this moment, has a space to drive forward change, because the helplessness and feeling like, you know, this government and the things that they do can't be held to account. I think that helplessness is dangerous. What we need is a space to channel that anger, that frustration, that fire into justice for education and into transformative change, because we deserve, as Jo was saying, we deserve a better education system. We deserve educational justice. Like, it should not be controversial to say that, you know, students from working class communities should have the same access to equal grades, to the institutions of their choice, to all of the things that they want from education, the transformation, the joy, the opportunities, all the things. Like, it shouldn't be controversial to say that we deserve to fight for that. So giving people a place to channel that fight and channeling it into justice for education.
Thanks, Larissa. I'm just going to bring Jo back in.
Yeah, I think what Larissa says is really important. I think it's important for two reasons. One, because actually, when was the last time, particularly anyone who's been around for a while, saw a Tory government with this type of majority do a U-turn of any type? It's pretty unheard of that they would do this. And if you compare any of the footage of Gavin Williamson fronting this up last Thursday to the kinds of comments that he had to make yesterday, this is a government who will be desperately embarrassed by having to do this. And I think what Larissa is saying in terms of hold on to your anger but do something with it is important, because the mask is off, it slipped, and the gloves is on from this government. They thought they could get away with this, and they've had to backtrack because of pressure that's been brought to bear, but has been made clear by, you know, what Lauren said about her students and what Delilah said. And we know that there's countless other people that would be able to tell the same, potentially even worse stories up and down the country, that, you know, you're labelled by the college you went to or by the postcode that you have. And that's why we're not letting this go. So I think that there's multiple levels that we have to fight this. And I'm a big fan when it comes to industrial tactics of saying you use every tool in the shed. So there is, you know, getting out there on the streets, if that's what you're able to do. We know not everybody's able to do that, and we shouldn't fetishize that as the one way of being a good ally or being a good activist. One of the other things that we are doing, and we outline this in the letter that we've sent to Gavin Williamson today, is we're saying we want some information from you. Thank you very much. And the information that we want is details of the equality impact assessment that was conducted during this process. I would really like to see that. Two, if there was no equality impact assessment, we would like to see, in compliance with various equality duties, the government publish information to demonstrate compliance with those public sector equality duties. And also details of any equality monitoring that the government plans to undertake in order to understand the long-term implications of the decisions that they made in relation to how these grades were awarded. Because some people now might be able to forget this chapter in their lives and say, I got into that university eventually. But what we've just heard from Delilah is several days on the phone, loads of heartache and loads of real uncertainty about what the next few days, weeks, months, year has in store. And we know now that that was predictable. We know that many people warned about it, and we know that it's disproportionately affected certain types of people. And we are not letting this go. And Gavin Williamson needs to know that if we don't get requests for that information, for now, our legal challenge and a judicial review is shelved. But that will not remain the case, because people, our staff, who have UCU members who have a stake in this, who tried to be part of the government consultation, that statisticians who tried to make this algorithm fairer but wouldn't sign a non-disclosure agreement for 5 years. None of these voices are going away, and the government needs to realise that an apology from Gavin Williamson on the 4 o'clock news is nowhere near sufficient for this.
Thank you, Jo. You're absolutely right. An apology is nowhere near sufficient. And actually, I think he needs to resign after this. It's been an absolute mess. We knew this would happen months ago. He was warned by teachers. He was warned by students. He was warned by educational institutions overall. He was warned by members of parliament, and they went ahead anyway. And somebody has to pay the price. You mentioned an equality impact assessment. The government have been notoriously bad on all of these, putting these forward. And actually, for some reason in England, they have to tell us that they've done an equality impact assessment, but under law, they're not required to publish it, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I remember as an NUS activist many years ago, actually doing a sample of colleges within London to find out if they were meeting their requirements under the Race Relations Act then, and finding that 100% of them were not. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission failed to take any action against them, and saying it would be too timely. So we definitely need to push them on that. And, you know, as you've added, one of the great placards that I saw when students were out over the past few days was this Tory government has decided our A-levels and our future, and tomorrow we're going to decide their future. And I thought that was very powerful. So we have had some questions in, so I'm going to go straight to those and answer them to our panel. And the first one is, will exam boards such as Pearson's treat vocational students as fairly as GCSE and A-level students? I'm going to put that question to Lauren first.
I know that fairly is a loose term, I think, because I think that there's several A-level and GCSE students that would probably debate the word fairly. I'm pretty certain Delilah doesn't really think she's been treated fairly in this process, but I understand what you're saying. We have to keep the pressure up, because we can't just say, okay, A-levels are sorted, that's it now. We can rest on our laurels and we can say that we've had this victory and it's been great, because BTEC students still don't know. And I think they were quibbling today. They were arguing about what percentage it is that they've actually downgraded, whether it's 0.5% according to Pearson or whether it's 2% according to Gavin Williamson. They can't even seem to get their figures straight at this point. I think the only way we're going to be able to get this sorted and be able to get this right for BTEC is just by keeping the pressure on. They think that they've had the A-level headline. They think that we'll go away and we'll be quiet. And it's that feeling, as Larissa said, that feeling of helplessness, that you can't actually do anything. We've been helpless too long. And for FE, and certainly for secondary schools that teach have sixth forms as well, BTECs are as much of that as A-levels. And A-levels make the big headlines. And, you know, we had the A-level results day, and every college in the country does the great pictures on results day of the students jumping in the air and waving their results. BTECs seem to be a bit more low-key because students already know their results. And I think they're relying on the same thing happening this year, is that they've had the big headlines, we've had the A-levels day, let's just push it under the rug now and forget about it. And we can't let that happen with the BTECs. We need to keep that pressure on. We need to keep saying to them that this is not good enough, and we need to get these results that these students deserve. And BTEC should be easier, really, to sort out than the A-levels were, because so much of it was portfolio-based and so much of it is evidence-based. I don't really see the difficulty that you're getting with BTECs. So we have to keep going. I think, to answer the question in a long-winded way, is that it has to be treated the same as A-levels and GCSEs are going to be, but we have to make sure they do that. They're not going to do that by themselves. And the only way to do that is that we keep that pressure on.
Thank you, Lauren. Jo, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that BTECs have been forgotten is probably the reason they thought that they could get away with these grades in the first place. And I think this whoever asked this question is right to talk about vocational and the idea that it's, you know, not being taken as seriously. And I think part of what I want to say, I guess, is that you know, the government thought that they could defend this algorithm on the idea that it's robust and fair. And in that sense, they were really kind of reaching for the language of objectivity and neutrality, as if an algorithm was anything else than the automation of politics and ideology. And I think that the issue with, you know, vocational degrees and the fact that BTECs have been forgotten in this process is exactly really just to sort of reiterate what Lauren's saying, that the predicted grades and the voice of the students and the teacher and that portfolio has to be central, and not some kind of grasping for what a neutral vocational kind of predicted grade should be, really.
Thanks, Jo. The next question I'm going to put to Delilah. So many students have lost their places at Russellbrook universities already, and now there's going to be so much competition next year. What do you think we should be doing about that?
I think schools and universities should definitely take into account all the chaos caused this year for next year's A-level student. I have a friend who's currently in year 12 going to year 13, and she's told me she is really worried about how the exams are going to go, because they're really worried that university is going to be oversubscribed. They're going to be much harder to get into, you know, higher grade boundaries, a lot of competition. So I think we really need to have a thorough look and a plan for next year's students. You know, how can we make it fair for them that they don't suffer as well as this year's students because of something which was essentially never their fault and which they shouldn't suffer for?
Thank you, Delilah. And Larissa, can I get you to come in on that question as well?
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask to come in, because I think this is about ensuring that kind of students get the places that they would have deserved had the government not been completely incompetent. So as what I was saying before, that like the students who've got their places and the students who haven't got their places, we need to look at the makeup of those students and think about the impact this is actually going to have in the future of the widening the gaps that we have in terms of educational inequality. And not just everyone can afford to defer into this economy where we've got a job market that students, how hard is it going to be for students just to survive the next year without, doing as they plan, going on to be students? There are so many considerations for students who haven't been able to get those places this year, and it's just not good enough. And that's why in our letter, we're calling on the government to make up that shortfall and to fund the places for students who should have had those grades that got them into their places in the first place, and so need to be accommodated. Like, this is not, the onus is not on students to be figuring out, oh, should I figure out how to, survive and defer or do this. There should be an accommodation made by the people who made this mess, and that onus sits squarely with the government.
Thank you, Lauren. To Larissa, sorry. I'm going to move on to Lauren next. But you make a really excellent point about what the makeup of those students are going to be and how it affects particular groups of people. And I remember a few years ago hearing that there were 2 universities in London that had more BAME students than the entire Russell Group put together. And that's just, the kind of makeup that kind of elitist system, continues to push forward. And I know Lauren wanted to add a point to this question. Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on Delilah's point, actually, about students in year 12. Our students this year have already been massively disadvantaged because they were the first year that had the GCSE new specification overhaul. Then they get the second year to have the A-Level new specification overhaul. So for my students at the minute, my content on the new specification is 30% more than it was in previous years. Don't forget, these students that are now going into year 13 that will be doing their exams this time next year have missed 4 months of teaching. And we're already looking at, certainly for my subject, there's going to be no change to the exam. The exam boards have said that they're not going to reduce the content, they're not going to reduce the exam questions. So as Delilah was saying, her friend is very concerned about next year. We're already going to probably see a competition for lesser university places or inflation of grades for those places. But we've also got a year group who've been massively disadvantaged because they've missed so much of that classroom time, and yet they still have so much content that they have to get through. And it's that lack of understanding and that lack of empathy towards students who have already faced so much difficulty. Majority of my students during the pandemic or during lockdown were actually key workers. So they were working in supermarkets or working in care homes. They're actually then trying to do their essays and trying to do their workload while they were in the evenings after they'd finished a full day at work. How on earth are they expected to then catch up and gain that kind of head start that people at other schools and other experiences have had? There's no awareness of how that's going to work for them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. We've got one more question in. Our university is concerned about the safety of students during the pandemic, especially more so with the increased intake. How can we convince them to allow and encourage deferrals? Can universities legally set a cap on deferrals to help control their student numbers for this year and next? And that comes from Tucker Drew. Can I ask Jo that question first?
Hi. I mean, I think the thing that needs saying is that, staff are now they were already facing, but they are particularly facing unbearable workloads dealing with this government's exams results fiasco. Despite the fact that there was clearly going to be a shortfall in funding because of the way universities are funded mostly via fees or, a big percentage of their income, they were already facing cuts and threats of redundancies due to the government's incompetence to step forward and really underwrite this sector during lockdown. Even the IFS were telling the government that they needed to do more. So this wasn't just the union sort of banging the drum of needing more funding. What we've seen now, obviously, with this and removing the student number cap means certain universities can hoover up students. And I think this is what's been alluded to here. And I've said that that's problematic because that's going to hit the finances of other institutions. But obviously, students, understandably, for various reasons, do want to go to the university that was their first choice. So, there's a real concern about what we do. My main answer to this question really is that this can't be addressed on an institution by institution basis. And I do really understand, having been a university worker, that if you were in a university, you would be wanting your particular institution to adopt the best practice. We know that some institutions have said that they will take all the people who qualify to get through. We know that some universities simply can't do that. You know, they don't have the space. They couldn't do it for health and safety reasons. If it's a placement module or a placement degree, they don't necessarily have the placements, or, you know, a medical degree. So I think that, you know, within reason, universities will try and accommodate this and make suggestions about deferrals. But I think, as we've heard from Delilah, there have be very good reasons why students can't or don't want to defer. And I think that the issue really, and this is one of the things that I've been saying for the past few days, but we really highlight in this letter, is that the government has to find a way now for moving forward, where they've wanted to bury their heads in the sand all summer about the funding that this sector needs. They've insisted on supporting a system that has institutions in competition with each other, even during a pandemic. The number caps were part of that. And now they're not stepping in to really resolve the mess that they've created. So for me, this cannot just be how institutions deal with it individually. Students are only really going to be able to encouraged to defer if the government offers forward and gives students something meaningful to do in the meantime. Otherwise, you know, as a member of staff in a university, it's going to be very difficult for you to hand on heart to say you should do this thing. So this is a structural problem, and it needs a structural solution. And the questions that we're asking Gavin Williamson is really, what are you going to do in this period? How are you going to ensure that if a student wants to go to a university somewhere, they can, that no academic capacity is going to be lost, that all jobs will be saved, and that there will be something meaningful for students to do who aren't able to go where they wanted to in the interim?
Thanks, Jo. Would any of our other panelists like to come back on that before I go to our next question? Larissa?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, or not, depending on time constraints. But yeah, I think fundamentally, this is about the fact that the most marginalized students are being told, these are the limitations on what you can do, these are the limitations on where you should go, where the most affluent students aren't being told that. So I think we need to be really cautious about kind of how we respond to this now, because we know that a lot of the most affluent students got their results on Thursday, got their places on Thursday, and that was sorted. So anything that we're saying now is really only going to those most disadvantaged students, those students from the poorest postcodes, those black and brown students, those disabled students who were let down by the government. So I think let's just keep that at the front and centre of our minds whenever we're thinking about what we're encouraging students to do in this moment.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Now, just as we're about to wrap up soon, in 2 weeks, MPs are going back to Parliament. We can't hide from you. The government certainly can't hide from us. And I want to ask all our panelists as we wrap up, what should MPs like myself, who are very, very supportive of the campaign for Justice for Education, what should we be pushing the government to do? What would you like us to see? What would you like us to push the government to do? What would you like us to see the government doing? And I'll ask Lauren first.
Thank you, Belle. I think to keep it on the agenda, to not let this get forgotten by the next big news story that comes along. It's too easy for the government to think that they've sorted it and move on to the next issue, and we're just firefighting all the time. We're just dealing with issues as they come up. Please just keep this on the agenda, keep it a talking point. Don't let them forget that we're out there and the students are out there, and we actually need this to be solved, especially before it gets much longer in the year and before we start doing this again next year.
Thanks, Lauren. Delilah? No, I think Delilah's frozen again. Okay, I'm going to go to Larissa.
I think my message to MPs is to really continue engaging with students on the ground who are really experiencing this. In your constituencies, please do be talking to students who are still living through this nightmare, who are still in the dark about their futures, who are still seeing their plans put on hold, particularly those who are the most marginalised, so that we can kind of fight for justice for them. And of course, I really would call on MPs who are in the places that we're going to be picketing on Thursday. If you're about, please come through and support, because as was said, like, there are multiple tools in our toolbox. We need you advocating for students in your roles in Parliament, but we also need you to be showing the students and encouraging them to stay active, to stay out there, and to keep pushing for the justice that they deserve. So I think there's definitely multiple roles that MPs can play in supporting us. One of them being kind of supporting on the ground, but also, of course, amplifying the letter that Joe and I have written. I think it would be really important as well, and doing that advocacy for the voices who aren't being heard by this government, or in fact are being purposely not listened to. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
Thanks very much, Larissa. The letter, which Larissa mentioned, is now up online. It's on the UCU website, and there should be a link in the chat. And Larissa, can you let us all know where we can find information about where we would find a picket in our area?
Yes, so on NUS Twitter, Insta, Facebook. On Twitter, we're NUS UK. On Insta, NUS_UK. Facebook, just search National Union of Students, and people will be able to find those pickets shortly, because they're coming up Thursday at 1 p.m.
Thank you very much. Delilah, we were just asking what, with Parliament going back in 2 weeks' time, what you would like to see MPs pushing the government to do.
Thank you. I'm sorry I dropped out. My device just ran out of battery. I just wanted to say that I hope that the government ensures that all students, no matter where they come from, what's their background, BTECs, A-levels, vocational qualifications, anything, that we all get the fair grades we deserve. If people can get to university that they want to go to, that they can go there, that there's a wide variety of options people to take, which are well funded and which are well explained to students, so they know what their options are and they're supported through this very difficult and stressful process.
Thanks very much, Delilah. And Joe?
Okay. What I would say is, if you're an MP, if you're part of this government in particular, the track record so far during this pandemic has been an NHS with barely any PPE. It's been one of the worst death tolls we've seen, despite an NHS and despite the wealth in this country. It's seen a huge spike in needless job losses. It's seen an absolutely cack-handed and blundered lockdown system that led to the city that I live in having to go into lockdown again. Do you want education to be the next victim of this government's incompetence? Is that another thing you want on your sheet, on your rap sheet of the things that were messed up during this 6 months? Because if you don't do something, and if you don't talk to your colleagues and get them to actually get your party, and I'm talking here to Conservative ministers, to do something about this. For the next 4 years, when you're looking for re-election, your constituency and the community that you are actively damaging now will make you pay. So even if you don't care about the future of these young people who have been shafted, even if you don't really mind about the idea that this algorithm was prioritizing already privileged people, think about the legacy of what is potentially going to happen here if institutions that are going to suffer as a result of students not going to them have to make job losses, if they even close as a result of this. Think about the institutionalized injustice, the intergenerational injustice. Search within your side yourself and say, is this what I want? And I don't think it is what anybody wants. So what I would really ask is for those people who are MPs to engage with UCU, to reach out to us. Throughout lockdown, I've been doing multiple briefings with different MPs across different political parties. I know that there are so many MPs with universities in their constituencies who are terrified for what this means for their local communities. You know, I know that there are people, regardless of their political stripe, who will not think that this is fair for young people. But simply thinking it, particularly when you're elected MP, is not enough. You have to make sure that you talk to your colleagues. You have to make sure that something better than what we currently have is put forward. because the cliff edge for this sector and the unfairness for the students that have already been, they have been downgraded. They might get their grades back, but their lives right now are in the balance. So do all you can, and don't expect this to be the responsibility of students to give you a moral compass here. It is on you.
Thank you very much, Jo. And that is a perfect note to end on. The fight is far from over. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us today. Please continue to support the work of UCU and NUS. So much more work to do. There'll be the pickets on Thursday, and they'll be continuing to update you on all of future campaigns, Fund Our Future campaign. It's really, really important that we support students and staff working together to demand justice for our education. And, you know, we have been able to force, the students themselves were able to force this U-turn. And I believe that with their support and with the support of everybody else, we can do so much more. So thank you so much. And hopefully see you on a picket line, or maybe in my inbox as an MP, writing to me, telling me what it is I should be pushing the government to do. Whatever it is you can do to support this campaign. Thank you very much.